Hello and welcome to the first episode of the ABCD, aka All Black People Can't Dance podcast. I'm your host, Isom Winton, and I'd like to take this opportunity in this episode to introduce myself and give you a little bit of background of who I am and where I come from that can basically lead us into the next episodes and full story of where we're going with this podcast. So, again, my name is Isom Winton. I was born in Kansas, and I basically lived throughout Kansas during most of my life. My mother, she worked for Union Pacific Railroad, which allowed me to travel around the Midwest, namely Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska, and St. Louis, Missouri. But ultimately, I ended up back in Kansas from about fourth grade onward. Now, thinking about dance and my earliest memories of dance, I can't really pinpoint where, I started to kind of, move my body or, call myself, a dancer. But I do remember my mother would always ask me to dance with her, right? So when her favorite song came on, it was usually an R&B song or a slow jam. She would say, "Hey son, let's dance together." And she would make me, slow dance with her, do the KC two-step, which I still can't do right, now. Kind of embarrassing, but we'll put that as another episode at some other time. However, so she would make me dance with her, and that's how I feel I got my groove and start to understand how to dance to the music, right? So these are my early days, elementary school, growing up. And, sometimes, my cousins would have, my older cousins would have music that they heard, from their classmates and things like that. They would bring that, but it was more about just listening to music and kind of, moving around. But when I got to junior high, this is when I really started to understand the importance of knowing how to dance for different social situations, because we would have the mixers, right? The seventh grade mixer where it's the start of the school year and everyone's getting to know each other, and the school put on a little dance in the evening, and we would go and listen to music and dance. And this is when my KC two-step skills came into play, and I was able to dance with girls or just dance and groove in a cypher or just hang out. So that was a really cool experience, and knowing that, okay, I can dance a bit, and because of this skill, I can interact socially on a cool level. So again, junior high, toward the end of junior high, we started to experience some teen clubs in the area, right? In Olathe, that's where I grew up, Olathe, Kansas. And we had this club called Guitars and Cadillacs. There's a couple other clubs we can get into, but Guitars and Cadillacs was like the main club that I went to with my group of friends, because, they allowed adults to be there and allowed them to drink. But, underage people could come in as well, but we weren't allowed to drink alcohol, obviously. Now, if you know Kansas or Olathe in general, it's, pretty segregated, meaning that, you have your cowboys, and you have just more of the kids and the pop culture and things like that. So the good thing about Guitars and Cadillacs at the time was that they played both types of music. So they would have the country music popping with the line dances, and we all joined in, because in Kansas, actually line dancing is a class. So we all had our line dance going on, and also the hip hop, the R&B, the top 100 pop stuff would also play. So you had this nice, cool mix of people interacting and dancing. And so then at that time, again, I'm dancing, hanging out, grooving, but it's mostly to interact with people, meet girls and things like that. But in the club at the time, my homie Shug Easy, shout out to Shug Easy, because he was always asking me, "Hey, Isom, let's bust this routine," you know what I'm saying? And I would engage him a little bit. He'd be like, "Hey man, you can dance like the way you dance, let's hang out and stuff." But, I was mostly into sports and, girls, as we all are at that time. He was in hip hop, I didn't really understand how deep until, afterwards I came to Japan and learned a lot more about the culture. But shout out to Shugeze because he is, I would say my godfather, my OG when it comes to just being introduced to hip hop and just the culture in general. So shout out to Shugeze. So then again, guitars and Cadillacs, we're dancing, we're hanging out, having a good time. But again, I wouldn't consider myself a dancer. It's just more like American culture, right? We go to the bars, we hang out, everybody's kind of like moving to the music and grooving or whatever. Fast forward, I go to university. My university was in Iowa, Grinnell College. Shout out to Grinnell College, the pioneers. And there we got a huge mix of people from all over the world and all over the United States. Small school, but we had a lot of cool cultures mixed together in that small liberal arts space. And of course we had dancing parties and dancing events. I often, helped organize a couple of dance events, my birthday party and such. And of course we were there, shaking it up, dancing to the music we like to. But again, didn't consider myself a dancer, just more like, I like to dance, I like music. But then again, at this time, I started to get offers from different, peers about, hey, why don't you join this dance group or this dance routine we're doing or this dance performance? I also had a summer job in New York where some of the teachers there invited me to organize and dance a play we were putting on for, the camp at the time. So again, I guess people started to recognize I had some rhythm, I had some kind of, skill for dance, so they would invite me, and of course I would do it all in good fun. But it wasn't until I came to Japan to where I really understood what dancing was, or what a dancer was, and what hip-hop dance was all about. So by the time I'm graduating Grinnell, this is 2004 in the spring, I'm hanging out, having a few drinks, and I'm going to a baseball game with some of my other peers at the time, classmates at the time. And one of my good friends, Ken Heiser, who is living in Japan now at the moment, still one of my best friends. At the time, we're talking about what we're going to do after graduation, and he's like, yeah, man, I'm going to teach English in Japan. You should join and sign up. And I'm like, Japan? Yo, that would be dope. I had no kind of image of Japan. I had no kind of, interaction. I mean, I had some Japanese, not friends, but there's a couple exchange students that I knew from high school, but I didn't know what Japan was. And again, it's kind of hard to imagine something halfway across the world in a different culture and different people. But, you always had this image of Japan as being, ahead of the times in terms of technology, and just a super cool place to want to visit. So I'm like, okay. I already had a job lined up. I was working as a campaign organizer for the congressman in Kansas, 3rd District of Kansas. Shout out to Dennis Moore. And I had a job, but I thought, let me just sign up with this English teaching thing in Japan as a backup, just in case, I want to try something new. So that's what I did. At the time I went online, signed up to be a NOVA instructor. Shout out to NOVA. At the time they were giving out visas like hotcakes. So I signed up online, went to the interview at the embassy in Chicago, got the job, and said, if I go, I want to go in about, let's say, a year's time or so, just to kind of feel out how the job in politics was going to work out. So I graduate, start my job as a campaign outreach director or organizer for Dennis Moore. He wins the election. I then transition into start working with him in his constituent services office. And that was a great time. I learned a great bit, but I still had this feeling like, yeah, you know what? I want to go out to Japan, I feel like it'd be a great opportunity to learn Japanese, even though I had no idea what that meant at the time, but also travel around Asia and just, get some perspective on the United States and, the political situation at the time, because this was 2004, mind you, where, Bush was running for his second term. There's a lot of things going on. We had just entered, I guess our first year into the war in Iraq. And so, again, I wanted to kind of get out, get some perspective, and I thought Japan would be a great place to do that. So in March of 2005, I decided to head to Japan. But before I went, I specifically told Nova that I wanted to go to the countryside of Japan. I wanted to go to the sticks. I mean, straight up, nothing around, just because I wanted to understand Japanese culture from a very kind of basic level. Going right into Tokyo, there's so much, foreign influence, and it's hard to learn Japanese. It's just so much easier to not learn Japanese in Tokyo. I thought, let me go from a base and really kind of like ease my way into the culture. So that's what I did. And upon researching Shimane, I figured, wow, this place is amazing. It's perfect for me. Why? Well, in Shimane, there's this shrine called Izumo Taisha. And according to Japanese mythology, every year around October, according to their old calendar, all of the gods from the prefectures all congregate and meet here. So I thought, this is perfect, right? My birthplace in Japan will be Shimane, which is the birthplace of Japan according to Japanese mythology. And they all meet around October, which is the month my birthday's in, so perfect, right? This is like destiny. I'm on point, I'm in my spiritual mindset, so I go to Shimane. I arrive in Japan, but to go to Shimane, I don't fly into Tokyo, I fly into Osaka. And this is, kind of early evening in Osaka. We get off the plane, we're going through the train stations, and the first thing that made an impression on me was all of the dancers that were dancing in the street. Dancing in the station, using the sides of the buildings as mirrors. And I was like, damn, like they're out here getting it. Like nobody's bothering them. The police aren't telling them to move. And from what I could see at the time, they're pretty freaking good. Obviously, I'm walking with my group and we're hustling to our hotel, but I was like, wow, this is amazing, right? So anyways, leave that in the back of my mind. I'm in Japan now. I'm super excited about what's going on. So, I get to my hotel, put my things down, but I have a little bit of jet lag, so I'm up. I'm ready to go. I head onto the streets of Dotonbori, right? And this is about, let's say, 10, 11 o'clock at night. In Kansas City, this is the time where stuff is popping, right? It's prime time because the clubs end, bars end, clubs end around 1 o'clock. But, so I'm thinking, okay, this is my mindset. So I go walk around Dotonbori and I hear some music coming out of this club. I walk downstairs. There's nobody there. I was like, y'all playing the right music, but the customers aren't here. So I'm like, what's going on? So at the time, I couldn't speak any Japanese. And the employee there was telling me, basically, I think, come back later or something like that. There'll be people here. But I couldn't really grasp that concept because, I'm thinking it's already, 10, 11 o'clock at night, nobody's gonna be here. So I go out, I'll start walking around again. And I get approached by, a young dude, speaks a little bit of English, and he's like, hey, how are you doing? What are you doing here? I'm like, yeah, I just got here today. I'm excited to be in Japan. He's like, oh, cool, man. Like, you wanna talk to some girls or something like that? I'm like, yeah, that would be pretty neat. You know what I mean? So he's like, all right, follow me. Follow him, we walk to the spot where I guess he worked. And I walk in and I look around and I'm like, everybody, literally everybody is wearing a prom dress. Hair done up, like they're literally going to prom. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. He sits me down and two young ladies come and sit next to me. They're like, you want a drink? I'm like, yeah, I have a drink or whatever. Start drinking, start talking. They spoke a bit of English. Obviously I don't speak any Japanese, so we're just kind of like, smiling and batting eyes at each other, whatever. And they asked me, oh, can we drink? And I'm like, well, hell yeah. Who am I to stop an adult from having an adult beverage? Of course you can have a drink. I thought, Japanese people are so polite, I'm like, wow, they even ask you if they can drink just so they don't disrespect you, or the vibe. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So we're all drinking, have a good time. And they give me their business cards. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I can just, call you up and, say, hey, how you doing? Let's go on a date or something. they leave, the other two girls come in. I'm like, damn, this is wild. Like, having a great time drinking, everybody's drinking, and it's just like, okay. But then, after, I guess, 2 or 3 hours passed by, the same young man that approached me from on the street says, hey, kind of like, you got to leave kind of thing. He's like ushering me out, but I'm like, I don't want to leave yet. You know what I mean? But he's kind of like, oh, we're going through this kind of like body language kind of thing where, okay, I got to leave kind of thing. So he walks me to the front door and they present me the bill, and it's 3,500 yen. Now, to be fair, 2-3 hours in that situation, rotation of girls, everybody's drinking, they're drinking. They could have charged me a lot more than that, to be straight up honest. However, they probably saw that I didn't have much money, so they're like, let's get him up out of here and just get what we can. So 3,500 yen, let's say it's about 300 US, okay? I didn't have that much. I had money, but that was a large chunk of the savings I brought just to kind of like, get started here in Japan. But, I paid it, obviously. But at that moment, I realized I gotta learn Japanese. Like, I cannot just be walking around here, walking to random places, not knowing what's going on. Yeah, I gotta learn Japanese, or this situation could happen over and over again on different levels, right? Still learning Japanese at the moment, 17 years later, but that's another story. So anyways, the next day, we hop on our bullet train, Shinkansen, go to Hiroshima, and I get on a bus to go to Shimane. All the travel, just being tired, being in a new space, I got kind of sick, caught a little cold, and I arrived at my apartment in Shimane, and I had a roommate. He was from Ireland, his name is Peter. Shout out to Peter, great dude. He took care of me, right? Took me to my room, I'm resting in my bed. He made me a meal, some hot soup, and basically I rested that particular night we met, the first night. Woke up the next day, and, we're talking. He's like, yeah, so Isom, what are you trying to do out here? I'm like, I want to learn Japanese. He's like, okay, well, learn this. Bust out notepad, paper, a, I, U, E, O, the pronunciations, and how to write it in hiragana and katakana. From that day forth, I learned hiragana and katakana, because at least then I knew I could read. And the cool thing about it is, it's everywhere. It's on the signs, everywhere you go to the restaurant, it's everywhere. So whatever, row I was learning that day, I would just look everywhere and try to point it out. So I learned hiragana and katakana in about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. It was very, very short time because I was writing every day, I was looking around every day, I was on point with it. Again, shout out to Peter, my first Japanese teacher, who basically, inspired me and pushed me to learn the basics of Japanese. And then again, at this time, I haven't seen any dancers in Shimane. I'm living my life, I'm learning Japanese, I'm meeting cool friends in Shimane, and having a great time. It wasn't until I went to Tokyo to visit my friend Ken, who originally introduced me to the concept of coming to Japan, that I started to get a different type of vibe and energy from Japan, specifically coming from Tokyo. So the next episode, I'll go into more detail about this first trip to this first trip to Tokyo, and how that made me more inspired to want to move to Tokyo. After living in Shimane for about 6 months or so, I was invited to take a trip to Tokyo by my friend Ken Heiser, who I mentioned before, the person who basically inspired me to come to Japan. So I get invited, I go, we have a great time. And during this time, the popular music, or what was popular at the time, was Def Tech, right? So this is kind of like, Japan and English fusion of music and beats and energy. It was awesome. So we're going to karaoke, we're going to like yakatabune, which is like, these boat cruises where you wear like the traditional Japanese like summertime dress or garb and have, go drinking with friends. So great time, summertime in Tokyo. And instantly I knew, wow, I have to be here. The pace, the heartbeat of the city was like, yeah, my vibe and my speed. And I knew that for me to really, kind of spread my wings in Japan, I need to be in Tokyo. I go back to Shimane. That week, I put in my, 30 days notice and say, yep, I'm moving to Tokyo and going to see what happens. At the time, Nova was going through a little bit of financial difficulties, a little bit of scandal going on with Nova. And I saw the writing on the wall, so I thought, okay, this is a perfect opportunity for me to move to Tokyo with a different company, use my paid vacation days and set up shop. Luckily, I was able to live with Ken, my homie, because his roommate, Paul, was moving out, so it was a perfect timing for me to move and really establish myself. However, upon moving to Tokyo, there's a lot of things that happened, including the kind of bad situation with Nova, so I went through a few struggles. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about my struggles in Tokyo and how I came in contact with the hip-hop dance scene during this time. All right, so stay tuned. My name is Ison Winton, your host for the ABCD, All Black People Can't Dance podcast. Check it out, stay tuned, and we'll be back. Peace.